One basic exercise would be to take a water bottle, put it on your stomach, lie down on the floor, inhale, and try to raise that water bottle toward the ceiling as high as you can. And then exhale, try to bring that water bottle as close to your spine as you can. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be explaining the importance of proper breathing and how proper breathing can help you look, feel, and perform better. But before I start, you guys know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, ding ding ding. And if you don't want to watch the entire video, I will be including timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead to the section that you want. Now, onto the topic at hand. A lot of people have an inverted breathing pattern and they don't realize the importance of breathing properly. And you can only go at most a few minutes without breathing, so that should go to tell you exactly how important proper breathing is. Now, with regard to why breathing is so important, every single system in the human body is going to rely upon oxygen. And if you have proper breathing mechanics, this will have a positive effect on your cognition, digestion, sleep, and also your stress management. Now, with regard to stress, we have two states. We have parasympathetic and we also have sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system, this is what helps to downregulate our bodies. This is our rest and digest system. So if you are breathing properly, you're taking nice deep breaths, this is going to activate more the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is going to help calm your body down. Whereas the sympathetic nervous system, this is what ramps you up. This is your fight or flight system. And when you are improperly breathing, this is going to activate more of your sympathetic nervous system. Basically, if you are doing shallow, deep breaths, that is going to help calm you down, put you in more of a parasympathetic state. If you are hyperventilating or doing very shallow breathing, then that is going to put you into more of a sympathetic state. And when you are in a sympathetic state, cortisol, which is your body's stress hormone, is going to be secreted. As I've stated in earlier videos, whenever you get stressed, your body is going to secrete the hormone cortisol, and it doesn't matter what type of stress you are under. It could be a physical stressor, mental stressor. Physiologically, as far as your body is concerned, stress is stress, and it doesn't matter if you are stressed mentally or if you are stressed because you're not breathing properly. Your body is going to secrete the hormone cortisol, and this could have a negative impact on how you look, feel, and perform. In terms of how you look, one of the ways that this could have a negative impact is when your cortisol levels are elevated, this is also going to elevate the hormone insulin. As you've already known from earlier videos, insulin is your main fat storage hormone. So if cortisol levels are elevated, that means insulin is going to be elevated as well, and it's going to make it easier for you to store fat. Another thing with regard to raised levels of cortisol is your testosterone levels are going to be suppressed. So if you do have high levels of cortisol circulating throughout your system, not only is it going to be easier for you to store fat because of the increased levels of insulin, it's also going to make it much more difficult for you to build muscle because of your lowered levels of testosterone. Toward the end of the video, I'm going to get into exactly what proper breathing looks like and how you should be breathing if you are trying to breathe for health or performance. That's going to be at the end of the video, though. I'm going to get into the breathing anatomy right now. So if you want to skip past the breathing anatomy, go ahead, look in the timestamps, and you can skip ahead to how to breathe properly. But right now, I would like to discuss breathing anatomy. With regard to your diaphragm can be broken down into three different parts. You have your sternal part, you have your coastal part, and you have your lumbar. Sternal, you should know from the keyword stir that it attaches to the sternum. Coastal, coast equals ribs, so those are the ones that attach to your ribs. And then lumbar, it's going to attach to your spine. With regard to all of these attachments, all three of these attachments are going to attach from your sternum to the internal surfaces of your rib cage and all the way to your spine. Now, if we were to break them down and go part by part, first let's take a look at the sternal part. Sternal, again, sternal has to do with the sternum. So obviously the sternal part is going to attach to the internal surface of the xiphoid process. When you take a look at your sternum, you have the manubrium, and then you have the actual sternum, which is the big breastbone, and then at the bottom of the sternum, you have your xiphoid process. If you were to palpate, so take your fingers and just feel around, that little part that you feel sticking out a little bit, that is your xiphoid process, and that is where the sternal attachment attaches to. Next, let's take a look at the coastal attachment. When it comes to the coastal part of your diaphragm, that is going to attach to the internal surfaces of the lower 6 ribs, so ribs 7 to 12, and it's also going to attach to their coastal cartilage. When it comes to your ribs, we have 12 ribs on each side, and we have two different types of ribs. We have true ribs and false ribs. And then false ribs, we could also further subdivide those into two more classifications, where we have our regular false ribs and then we have our floating ribs. With regard to our true ribs, the reason they are are called true ribs is because they have a direct attachment to our sternum, and those are going to be ribs 1 through 7. Now, our false ribs, those are going to be 8 through 12. With regard to our false ribs, first I want to cover the first classification. With ribs 8, 9, and 10, those are considered false ribs, and the reason they're considered false ribs is because they don't have a direct attachment to the sternum. Rather, they attach through the costal cartilage. The costal cartilage is the cartilage that attaches the ribs to the sternum, and with regard to ribs 11 and 12, those are what is called floating ribs. The reason they are called floating ribs is because if you were to palpate at the bottom of your rib cage, you will find close to the outside that you have 2 ribs that are just sticking out, and they have 0 attachment to your sternum. They are just there and they are floating, hence the name floating ribs. And then lastly, we have the lumbar part of the diaphragm. The lumbar part, it is going to attach to the vertebrae of L1 to L3. In terms of what exactly the diaphragm does, the diaphragm is basically this dome-shaped muscle inside of our abdominal cavity, and one of the things that it is responsible for is increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. Whenever you take a deep breath in, what's going to happen is the diaphragm is going to contract, and when it contracts, it is going to move inferiorly, so down toward the floor. And the reason it moves inferiorly is, again, to increase the size of the thoracic cavity and to allow your ribs to expand more. Another one of your respiratory muscles is going to be your external intercostals. With regard to your external intercostals, they are muscles that attach in between the spaces of your ribs, and it attaches from all of your ribs, ribs 1 through 12. In terms of what exactly they do and specifically where they attach from the inferior border of your rib to the superior border of the rib that is inferior to the rib that it attaches to. I'm going to explain that a little bit more because it might seem a little bit confusing, but let's say this is rib number 1, this is rib number 2. Your intercostal is going to attach from rib 1 to rib 2, so it's going to attach from your inferior border of rib 1, which is the bottom portion, to the superior border of rib 2, which is the top portion of that. So because it attaches from the inferior border to the superior border, what happens is when that muscle contracts, it is going to elevate your ribs. And with regard to this action, it will also have a reverse action. I'm going to explain that in just a second, but it is going to elevate ribs 1 through 11. That is only if the superior border is the fixed point of the muscle. Let's say you reverse the action. If you end up fixing the inferior rib, what's going to happen is if this part is fixed, because this lower rib has nowhere to move, it has no other option but to bring the superior rib down toward the inferior rib. So when the superior rib is fixed, it will elevate the rib cage, and when the inferior rib is fixed, it is going to depress the rib cage. And the last respiratory muscle that I would like to discuss is going to be the internal intercostals. The internal intercostals, as with the external intercostals, they are going to attach between the spaces of all of the ribs, so ribs 1 through 12. And one of the other things with regard to the internal intercostals is that they are also going to attach to the costal cartilages. If you recall from a few seconds ago, the costal cartilage is the cartilage that attaches the bony rib to the actual sternum. Now, with regard to the action of the internal intercostal muscle, it basically has the opposite action of the external intercostal. So because the internal intercostal muscle attaches from the superior border of one rib to the inferior border of the rib that is directly superior to it, it is going to depress the ribs. And as with the external intercostal muscle, it will also have an opposite effect. So if you end up fixing the opposite rib, rather than elevate the rib, it is going to depress the rib cage. But that is a basic breathing anatomy of the muscles that are involved in your respiratory system. And now that you have a little bit of functional anatomy knowledge of your respiratory system, I want to discuss exactly how poor breathing can affect your posture. With regard to posture, your breathing mechanics are going to affect different areas of your body, particularly your spine, your upper extremity, and your lower extremity. With regard to these different areas, if we were to take a look at the spine and we take a look at inhalation and exhalation, whenever you do inhalation, so inhale, what's going to be involved is your trunk, so your spine is going to do axial extension, so it's going to extend backward. Another thing, if we were to look at the upper extremity, when you inhale, when you are inhaling, your shoulders are going into external rotation, you are going into abduction, your scapula are retracting, and you will be going into supination, so palms toward the ceiling. With regard to the lower extremity, what's going on with your hips exactly when you inhale? Well, when you inhale, your hips are going to be going into extension. They are also going to go into external rotation and into abduction. Now that we know what they do when you go and inhale, how exactly does it affect your posture when you exhale? Well, when you exhale, all of those actions are basically going to be reversed. So with regard to your spine, you are going to do axial flexion on the exhale. With regard to your upper extremity, the upper extremity when you exhale is going to be involved in internal rotation. Because you're doing internal rotation, that's going to be coupled with scapular protraction, so the scapula moving away from the midline, and it is also going to be responsible for pronation of the upper extremity and also adduction, so bringing the humerus or the upper arm bones closer toward the midline. And with regard to the lower extremity, when you exhale, that is going to be coupled with flexion of the hips, internal rotation of the hips, and also adduction of your hips. And now that you have a basic understanding of how inhalation and exhalation is going to affect your spine, your upper extremity, and your lower extremity, you can put together how exactly poor breathing mechanics can affect your posture. Because let's say you do have something like a hyperkyphotic posture, you have a hunch like that. What's going to happen is you're not going to be able to get a full inhale because inhalation is coupled with extension, so extension of the spine, external rotation, abduction, and also supination. So if you are very, very pronated, internally rotated, and hyperkyphotic, you're not going to be able to take in a nice deep breath. And if you're unable to take a full, nice deep breath, what's going to happen is, again, your body is going to be in a more sympathetic state, which means cortisol is going to be circulating. And if cortisol is circulating, insulin is up, fat storage goes up, testosterone drops, harder to build muscle. So you want to be able to improve your posture and correct all of these imbalances to be able to get a nice full deep breath. And by getting a nice full deep breath, it will have a positive effect on your overall health. Now that we've discussed a little bit of posture and breathing, how exactly should you breathe? Well, this is going to be dependent on what type of breathing you are doing. Are you doing anatomical breathing, or are you breathing for the purposes of exercise? If you are doing anatomical breathing, so breathing for the purposes of health, then it's going to be a little bit different, because when you are breathing anatomically, what should happen, most people, you should have the first 2/3 of your breath originating in your belly. So the first 2/3 of your breath, the belly should expand. The next third, the final third, then the chest should expand. And then on the exhale, it's the exact opposite. The first third of the exhale, the chest is going to collapse. And then the last 2/3 of your exhale, the stomach should collapse. With regard to breathing, a lot of people are going to have an inverted breathing pattern. And what that means is a lot of people, when they do breathe, they are chest breathers. So instead of breathing through their stomach, they inhale, and then you just see their chest expand out, and even their traps. And that is what is referred to as an inverted breathing pattern. So if you are the type of person where whenever you take a nice deep breath in, your chest expands and you shrug up with your shoulders, that is something that you would want to correct. And you could correct that by doing a lot of diaphragmatic breathing exercises. One basic exercise would be to take a water bottle, put it on your stomach, lie down on the floor, inhale, and try to raise that water bottle toward the ceiling as high as you can. And then exhale, try to bring that water bottle as close to your spine as you can. Keep doing that until eventually it just becomes a reflex for you and you don't have to think about it and you just breathe that way normally. I know that for myself, when I first started practicing this, I used to have an inverted breathing pattern and I was a big chest breather. Now I've managed to correct this, and it did take a lot of time. It's not something that you could practice for 1 month and then it's automatically going to correct itself. You have to practice it continually. One of the reasons why it's going to take a long time is because you take tens of thousands of breath every single day. So if you are only working on your breathing mechanics for 5 minutes a day, that leaves 23 hours, 55 minutes a day where you're not thinking about it at all. So it is going to take a lot of work, and it's not something that you can correct really quickly. Now, aside from breathing in the stomach and also the chest, we also want to breathe in 3D. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, 3D breathing means you are not only breathing front to back, but you are breathing side to side and up and down. A lot of people, this is another thing that I see in my clinical practice, they do not breathe in 3D. They only breathe in their chest, front and back. But if you want to breathe 3D, you should breathe stomach, chest, and then also you should have a little bit at the very end of your inhale of lateral expansion. And then at the very end of your inhale, you should also have a little bit of vertical expansion. And then when you exhale, the vertical expansion should drop down. The horizontal expansion, so the lateral expansion, that should come back in. And then your chest and abdominals should come back in. That is basically what is referred to as anatomical breathing and 3D breathing. Now, what if you are not breathing for the purposes of just health? What if you are breathing for exercise? Well, this is going to be dependent on what exactly are you doing. If you are doing very vigorous exercise, or if you are doing very, very low intensity exercise, or something like rehabilitation. First, I would like to discuss low intensity exercise and rehabilitation. If you are doing that type of exercise, then you would want to breathe anatomically. And what I mean by that is if we go back to the function of what your body's doing in terms of the spine, the upper extremity, the lower extremity, when you breathe, whatever those functions are, that is how you would want to breathe. So we already discussed that when you inhale, in terms of the spine, you go into axial extension. So if you were doing an exercise like a back extension, you would want to inhale on the extension part. Now, if you were training for strength and high intensity, you would want to exhale on the extension. One of the reasons why you are exhaling on the extension is because when you are strength training, the concentric portion of the lift is going to be the most difficult. So you want to exhale during the concentric phase of the lift. The concentric phase is the lifting phase. So let's say you are doing a squat. When you are doing a squat, if you were to breathe anatomically, when you squat down, what's going to happen is your torso is going to flex. You're going to have flexion of the hips. So you would want to exhale on the way down if you are doing anatomical breathing. Whereas if you are doing strength training and you are lifting at a high intensity, you would want to do the opposite. You are going to exhale on the concentric. So you would inhale as you lower the weight and then exhale as you explode up. Same thing with the bench press. With the bench press, you would inhale at the lowering phase, and then if you are training for strength, you would exhale as you explode up. Now let's say you're coming off of a shoulder injury and you want to rehabilitate your rotator cuff. Well, we know that when you inhale is coupled with external rotation. So if you're training your external rotators, what you would do is inhale on the concentric portion and then exhale on the eccentric portion, so the lowering phase. That is only true if you're going, again, low intensity or doing something like rehabilitation. If you were training your external rotators for strength, then you would exhale on the concentric, so the external rotation part, and then you would inhale on the eccentric, so the lowering part when you bring your hand back toward your stomach. And now that we know how to breathe anatomically and also for the purposes of exercise, how exactly would we breathe if we were breathing for the purposes of stretching? Well, with regard to stretching, it's going to be much better to synchronize your breathing with the movement as opposed to having a set time that you hold a stretch for. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's say you are stretching your pectoralis major. Your pec has three main actions. It is going to be flexion of the shoulder, horizontal adduction, and then also internal rotation. So to stretch the pec, you need to reverse all of those actions. So because it does adduction, we go into abduction. Because it does internal rotation, we go into external rotation. And because it does flexion, we would go into extension. So if you are stretching, what you would do is you would inhale as you go into the stretch. And then rather than just holding it for a set period of time, you would exhale and allow your breath to gently guide you deeper into the stretch. This is going to be a much more effective way of stretching. And one of the reasons why it's going to be more effective is it's going to help calm down your nervous system. If your nervous system is relaxed, it's going to be much easier for you to relax into the stretch and get nice and deep into it. Whereas if you are just trying to get as deep of a stretch as possible and you are just forcing it, you're not going to be able to relax as much. And when you're not able to relax, what's going to happen is you are going to start to contract the muscle. And when you contract the muscle, the whole point of stretching is to elongate the muscle. So contracting the muscle is going to have a counter effect on stretching that muscle. So if you want to stretch for optimal results, then synchronizing your breathing with your stretch is going to be much better. But that's basically it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to make more of these types of videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.